extravaganza. Ryan Ray alongside the good doctor herself, Dr. Ellen Wald. Dr. Wald, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Oil market seems to be a little bit less than fine.
The oil market is. mm, okay, so right now I'm looking at it. It's sitting at WTI's at a buck 20, Brent's at a buck 25. Natural gas is only at 490, so it's
Hmm.
it's only at 490.
Only.
Um, yeah. So I mean, if you would have asked me, hey, we're gonna have a prolonged war between or invasion or whatever you call it between the Ukrainians and the Russians, I would have thought 120 is a reasonable number. It's not out of hand
Hmm.
for that. I mean, so
Okay. Okay. I mean, 135. I think we were up at that earlier today or last night.
if it goes
So,
on longer, I mean, if it goes on longer, well, I guess let's talk about this. Let's kind of, I'll move the stories out of order because
yes.
if it goes on longer, we're going to have to do something. I said we're going to have to. You would expect something to be done. So we got two different stories here. Biden advisors weigh Saudi Arabia trip for more oil, and then also from the Wall Street Journal, U.S. officials meet with regime in Venezuela to discuss oil exports to replace Russia's. Something's feels like it's going to have to give, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because the headline on the buy that they want to go to Saudi Arabia and get more oil. It sounds like they're actually going to go there and like bring it back themselves, like on Air Force One or two or whatever it is they're taking.
Right.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I just don't see how they're going to get Saudi Arabia to break with OPEC and OPEC plus. I mean, it just doesn't seem to me that that's in the cards. I could be wrong. Maybe they'll offer something or threaten Saudi Arabia very compellingly, but it just, to me, I think they're going to end up with the same line, which is that this oil crisis or whatever is a geopolitically caused crisis.
hmm
And so, you know, there isn't really much we can do. Plus, they don't have a whole lot of spare capacity to begin with. I mean, I think Saudi Arabia could add, what are they at now? Are they at 11 yet? Or are they still in the tens? I can't remember what their OPEC quota is. Let's check OPEC.org. See what OPEC says their quota is. Here, let's see. The production table. Saudi Arabia. Okay, so they're 10.4.
hmm
So they've got room. I mean, they could up it by at least 1 million barrels a day
But will
easily.
they?
I don't think so because there's no compelling reason for them to explode or blow up the OPEC plus group or deal to do this. Is there? I mean, can you think of any compelling reason
Well, what do you
for
think
them?
happens with? Well, what do you think happens with Russia? So, if you think Russian production is going to drop off for some reason, wouldn't you re-examine it then?
Yeah, so okay. It's interesting, but because, like have they ever, I mean, there are a couple of countries in the group that are under sanctions and they're not, producing more just because Venezuela is not exporting. On the other hand, Russia is a really big player.
hmm
I think if they see like a blockade or like a physical disruption in the oil market, as opposed to like voluntary like groups just not buying Russian oil, then it could be a more compelling argument because they can at least make a market-based argument. But short of that, I don't see how they're going to get how the US is going to get the answer that they want. And
Okay.
yet that's like the prevailing, like I had a conversation with someone who is like, I don't want to say like he's like in with the Democrat Party because he's not. He just, like is a proponent of Biden policies. Let's put it that way. Because I want to understand, like, how did all these like liberals suddenly become like neocons? and like what's the idea? Like like what are they thinking? And he's like, no, this is like, he didn't use the terms like good versus evil, but that was like the sense that I got. And it was like any country that can produce oil and isn't should be should have like heavy diplomatic pressure or sanctions or no, and any country that's buying Russian oil should be sanctioned. But
Wow,
like
that's
you think
that's
like
bold.
right, but he doesn't think that that's bold. See,
I mean,
that's
that's
so is that the mindset of the administration? That this is just like a basic precondition to like coexist in the like world of nations, because it doesn't just work like that. Like, I mean, that to me that just shows like you don't really understand the global oil market or the global economy. You don't really have a sense of like what it actually means to enforce sanctions. You can't just like sanction India and
mhm,
China and like Germany, like some of the biggest economies in the world.
right.
It's just not possible.
So let me roll this at you. What if the Saudis are still frustrated with the Russians from 2020? And they're looking at the
Mm.
Russians going, you screwed this would have been bad, but you screwed this thing up so much worse than it had to be back in 2020 that we're paying the price for it now. And you're screwing it up again by going after Ukraine. If you guys would just sit down and shut up, life would be easier. Would that maybe compel them to restructure the deal, use this as a way to outlever the Russians to kind of put them back in their place?
I don't think they see it as that, and I don't think they have that leverage. I think it was I mean, yeah, they did screw up in 2020, but partially because the screw up was so bad, they they traumatized the shale industry so much. I don't want to say they like killed it because I hate those terms. Like
Yeah.
they severely traumatized
Oh yeah.
it so much that like it's $100 a barrel and they're still not opening the taps.
Hmm.
So, I think that they really think like if they blow it up now with Russia, they'll never again have Russia involved in the OPEC fold, and they'll just their power they'll have no market management power at all, which just goes to show you how weak OPEC is.
Right. Right. Yeah, I saw a Nas talking today on Twitter. I think he was saying that OPEC's his goal should be to have the market balance. I think he said by 2024. 2024. So that's a long time. That's a
Yeah.
long time. I mean, that's getting out there. Okay, so you got Venezuela, you've got Iran, right? What's more likely that the Biden administration works out something with Venezuela and Iran, or somehow the Chinese, or I don't know. You would think the Chinese would be all over these opportunities right now. They're able to lever it, and that Russia doesn't come back into the fold, and they kind of have this, I hate to say black market, but secondary market of
Yeah.
new oil producers who are like, you know what, screw the old way. Iran's making it, Venezuela's making it. They're taking a hit, but you know what, we're going to work through it that way. And Russia kind of goes that path where they sell, um, you know, on the black market, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. Well, I think that if the US and possibly part of Europe, although it looks increasingly unlikely that Germany will get on board with this at all, if they really do decide to try to cut off Russian energy, imports, I think that then it's basically a given that that will be the impetus to really create basically like two blocks. Like if you remember back when we had like the West and the non-West or whatever, and you had the communist bloc, and they were kind of their own economic system. You're basically doing the same thing between China, Russia, Venezuela, Iran, North Korea, whatever. And they will do business not in dollars. And some countries will participate in it. I think India probably will. There are countries that will want to participate in both. But they will not use the dollar. And so you've got a whole other system. And, I just think that I'm not going to like come down on like, this is good or this is bad or but like, this is a outcome. This is a consequence that needs to that should be considered. Like, this is not an unforeseen consequence. This is a foreseen consequence that I would hope would be being considered, because as to whether this is really something that you want to push them into. And there's this idea that somehow banning petroleum imports is going to like cripple the Russian economy. But here's what I want to know. Like, okay, I get it. Their economy's in trouble. Well, guess what? So is ours.
Right.
Like, come on. Like, the gasoline prices went up where I live from $3.99 to $4.19 a gallon.
Yeah, we're all biking here locally.
Morning.
We're walking and biking.
Yeah.
We're done. We're done driving.
Yeah. So, like, it's. I mean, I don't see how you can not think that our economy also has trouble. Okay, fine, Russia will have worse, but like, Putin doesn't care about the rank, like the people.
Yeah. Well, I think
they don't like. He's not going to get voted out. It's not like here, November's going to come and people are going to be pissed. Like, so what is it that they think they're achieving by this? Is it really gonna, like, do they think that this will get Russia to withdraw from Ukraine? Or is it just gonna make them feel better because they feel like, oh, well, we're not contributing to it because we're not, our dollars aren't going towards it, which is fine. That's a legitimate like argument. Like, it's a legitimate argument to say, I do not support this war. I don't want American dollars going. But if you're trying to use it as a policy or diplomacy tool, like, sorry, sanctions are you can't conduct policy just by sanctions. It just doesn't work. It didn't work with Iran. Like, it's not going to work. All you're going to do is Russia will just send more oil to China. And yeah, they'll pay a discount, but so what? It'll be $90 instead of $120. Like, big freaking deal. Yeah. Right? And then you'll get a reorganization of the oil market eventually, but the process and the dislocation that will occur will be really, really bad for America and Europe.
But it's not only oil, right? A couple things there. One, you have the economic factors, which you have nations around the world who are feeling this inflation, and so are they going to pay higher gasoline prices, oil prices, however you want to phrase that, just to support this Ukrainian-Russian issue, conflict, war, invasion, whatever you want to call it, to be on the so that's very questionable. I think. So then
it's a totally questionable policy, and I think, like, I mean, I asked that yesterday. I was like, do people think that people in the U.S. will like that? Like, they will say, that's okay, I'll pay $6 a gallon this summer for my driving trip because I know that I'm supporting, Ukraine against that murderous Russian dictator or whatever. I mean, like, really?
Have you looked at wheat prices though? I've got it pulled up here.
Oh my God.
So wheat prices are out the roof, and Russia is a major exporter of wheat. So then you go, okay, well, you got, they can get oil discounted because they're getting on the black market or whatever. Then they can get wheat potentially discounted because they're getting it, not using SWIFT and going to these different various means. So Russia could maybe package some of this stuff up and try to get some countries to buy from them, because wheat prices are outrageous. They're only going up. Let's see if I can change this chart and make it a little bit more. That's the 1 year chart. This is what it looks like over the month, which is a staggering increase. So there's all kinds of stuff that I don't want to say plays in the favor of Russia. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but definitely makes it not as clear cut that people will just side with the U.S. sanctions or the Russian sanctions. Like, it's complicated because people are hurting.
And it's also, the wheat issue is a bigger problem because Russia exports a lot of fertilizer. And so if exports, first of all, it sends a lot to Ukraine. They also produce a lot of wheat. They're now like not planting because of obvious reasons. But if other places can't get Russian fertilizer for planting season, then like what's then they're not going to be planting wheat, but the Russians are going to have tons of fertilizer, and so like you're,
Well,
you're setting yourself up for an even bigger issue.
didn't I see that the Russians said Thursday or Friday that they're going to quit exporting fertilizer to the nations, the U.S.
I
and
think
the Western.
so, yeah. So
Right. That means fertilizer prices could go high. Right. So you can see there's yeah, it's not it is not a clear path here. Moving
I just
forward.
yeah. And then you're like, well, it's a war. We are preventing World War III. Like,
Yeah, I'm not sure.
what
Yeah.
I had someone else respond to a comment like, well, we're in a war. We are? This is news to me. Since when are we in a war?
Are we talking about the U.S. bombing Somalia again, or are
Yeah.
we talking about that? we talking about supporting the Yemen? Which war are we talking about here?
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
We were just in a 20-year war.
yeah. Right.
Like, I'm pretty sure we're not actually at war with Russia in Ukraine.
I was told for a long time that that was the major thing that we wanted to avoid was a war with the Russians. I'm old enough to remember that. Like, that was a big thing.
That
So
was yeah.
that
Yeah.
was a big thing. Okay,
Yeah.
let's touch on gasoline prices. You mentioned it here. They surge above $4 a gallon. We should get the guy from Gas Buddy on because I'm sure his phone and notifications are going crazy
Oh yeah.
all over the world with or all the U.S. with what's happening to gas prices. Now, one of the things we talked about a while back is coming out of COVID, more people work from home. That's kind of been going away some, but our economy's set up to kind of go back to that, right? It's not as if this was 30 years ago where people work from home and we don't do that anymore. You still have a lot of hybrid work going on.
Yeah.
How long do you think until employees are like, you know what? I'm going back to the house. Sorry, I'm
Oh
just
yeah.
going back to the house.
No, well, I remember when energy prices were rising in Europe, and I think they were like super high in Sweden. Samir was saying he's like, people are making this calculation. They're like, I want to stay home and work because it's cheaper because like I can't afford to commute, or because I don't want to pay to commute. So that is not out of the question at all. And but here's an interesting thing that came up in this article that I wanted to bring to the attention of listeners because this yes, a lot of the increase is due to the oil market going crazy over will they sanction, will they not sanction, Russia, whatever. But the U.S. had a refining issue before this. It says in the US, the ability to refine gasoline declined sharply during the pandemic driven economic slowdown. The market has lost about 1 million barrels of daily gasoline refining capacity since early 2020, when the US was producing about 19 million barrels of gasoline a day. That's an interesting
Yeah, that's a number.
thing. Like that is not insignificant. And so we're already down a significant capacity, which also explains why we're not exporting as much. But it definitely puts us in a difficult, position going into the summer anyway, considering also that we import Russian, petroleum products. I mean, where's the push to say get back, to return to our previous refining capacity or open a new refinery or restart, and especially if the margins are there.
Well, I got criticized the other day because we are always bashing Biden, but I think it's safe to say that it's unlikely during the Biden administration you will see much work with refiners
Yeah.
because they might, gouge prices or something along those lines, and the government's
Oh,
concerned about those things,
yeah.
obviously. So
But it says analysts were split on whether gasoline prices could rise high enough to discourage Americans from road trips. So you were talking about commuting. How high? I mean, and that's what they call demand destruction. And I think a lot of people think that demand destruction isn't going to occur at nearly the same prices as we would have thought it would occur because there's like pent up demand and also because of inflation. But if inflation's hitting everywhere, I mean, are people really gonna? I just don't know. Like, What if gasoline prices are $7 a barrel, $7 a gallon
Yeah. I
this
think the
summer?
question, we were talking about doing a vacation with some friends this summer, and it's only a 4-hour road trip, so it's not that far to where we're looking at going, or 5 hours. It's a relatively short trip. Um, but if gas is $7 a gallon, you're like, sheesh, that's double the price to get down there and back as we thought it was gonna be. And,
Mm-hmm.
we gotta take 2 cars because we got a big family, and
Yep.
so, you start doing all that, and so I wonder, I would like, I don't know, maybe a listener knows where the state is at, but where is, when are most vacations booked? So what time of the year are they booked? Because if they're not booked until, late April or May, then, we probably won't really know what's gonna happen, until then. But if they're in the process of being booked now, will consumers kind of project out these
Mm-hmm.
high numbers into the summer and go, "You know what? I'm not gonna commit to that." And so,
Yeah.
yeah, spring break is on the way. So, but I guess it's mainly, I don't know, maybe families travel. It's mainly college students, right?
Yeah, spring break for college students is usually March. I thought I don't know. When
But I
spring
mean,
break for families like April?
yeah, but I guess that most people
Mm,
for spring break that's mainly college students traveling during spring break period. Now, I mean, I guess there's probably some families, but
I don't know. Are more people gonna fly? I don't
ooh,
know.
well, then you got ticket prices for airplanes, so
Yeah.
it is a
I,
quagmire.
yeah, I think. I mean, and I think everybody has their own price point at which they start to curb their use. Um, but I mean, everyone, like all the officials or whatever, they all are like, "This is a long haul. This is a long haul." I mean, I don't know. Are the Democrats trying to lose in November? Because they're gonna be blamed for the high gasoline prices, whether or not it's their fault.
Well, and the interesting thing is that few won't talk about is that, obviously a lot of this is a result. Some of the inflation stuff is a result of what happened during the Trump administration. But because the Democrats were on the side of the lockdowns, the shutdowns,
Yeah.
the disruption, they can't blame it on the previous administration. And so you have this kind of thing where normally they'd be saying, "Well, this happened under the last
Yeah.
guy," but they can't because they
They can't.
supported that mentality.
Yep.
And so, hey, listen. Some people will have to stop drinking less than $20 venti Starbucks coffee. Listen, that's outrageous that you suggest that. I like my
Yeah.
$20 Starbucks coffee. Okay, I don't want to give that up. Um, so you can't really blame the Trump administration because you were on that side of that issue, and so that's
Yeah.
where it gets tough moving forward because their policies haven't helped much either, and so you've kind of double whammied it.
Yeah. And then you have like, you know, Secretary Buttigieg coming out and saying, buy electric, buy electric. Well, here's the thing. First of all, electric is really expensive. Hybrid, even more expensive. With what money are people going to buy electric cars? Where are they going to charge them? And third of all, guess what else is also going up? Your electricity bills. So just because when you plug your car in to charge in your house, you don't see a little ticker with the amount you're paying going up
Mhm.
like you do when you're at the gas station, doesn't mean it's not going to show up in your monthly electricity bill. And electricity bills are much higher now because guess where your electricity comes from? Fossil fuels mostly. So,
So
you know,
my wife was telling me
it's
yesterday that
like,
so
but I wonder.
go ahead. Go ahead, Fish.
Oh, I was just say that I think, it's like one of those out of sight, out of mind issues. But I
Mhm.
do wonder if this current situation. I wonder. I don't wonder. I know it's obvious that that the powers that be, or whatever, or the people in charge of policy in the United States and probably most of Europe, except maybe Germany, are going to use this as a reason or an excuse to push more renewable green policies as the answer. And the truth is that those they're just not good at, like, it's just not going to solve anything. You can't just suddenly tell everybody to go out and buy an EV.
I will say talking about the coffee. Someone said 20, but dark coffee 25. Yeah, that. So yesterday, my wife was telling me that some of her friends were talking about, I don't know, some kind of dressing, style dressing. It was 20. It was like I can't remember the percentage it went up. It was like $7 a bottle for salad dressing, or $8 a bottle, and it was like
Wow.
3 or 4 before. And I was like, well, whatever that is, we ain't buying it. we don't need that bad. So it was crazy. It was
Oh,
just
yeah.
a standard size bottle of just
I mean,
not
look at the
ranch,
prices at the
whatever.
grocery store. Anyone who doesn't think that there's massive inflation doesn't do their own grocery shopping.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned ESG. Let's talk about it.
Favorite.
Very favorite. This is a commentary piece from the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah,
ESG
it
may be
is.
an antitrust violation. Okay,
So
that's an
I'm gonna
interesting
admit that
take. Go
I
ahead.
read this like really early in the morning, so maybe my comprehension wasn't at its best, but I like couldn't understand his point. Like it seemed like he had like 5 different points,
Uh-huh.
but he was conflating them all as ESG.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
I was like very confused. And so he's like, okay, so, you know, it's nearly impossible to raise money to explore for oil and gas right now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I buy that. So then is he saying that the banks and the money managers are coordinating
Yeah, that's what he
this
seems to be saying.
together? He
Yeah.
seems to be saying that they've all gotten together and decided that this is, but is that really an antitrust violation?
See, I wonder if it's the
Who's the
bankers.
consumer here?
Right. See, I wonder if it's the bankers as much as the people who have the money in the banks. Right. So if
Uh,
you might have, a lot of money in a lot of different deals, and so you're just Ryan Ray might have sway in a lot of different circles, and so his sway happens to impact this bank, this private equity group, this VC, and so they all start making the same actions because one whale kind of is steering multiple ships, and so I don't think I don't know how individual investors could be guilty of that, but that would seem to be probably more of what's happening than the banks themselves, right? So
yeah.
like people like there are people putting money into their bank are saying, no, you can't do that. And they're responding to that.
Yeah. But I don't think that I think I think that the use of the term ESG is actually really incorrect here because I think what he really means is climate activism, not ESG. ESG is just like
Sure.
is not what he's I think that was part I think that was part of where I got thrown off because he says, okay, there's a group called Climate Action 100 plus of
Hmm.
hundreds of banks and money managers, and together they manage $60 trillion. I've never heard of this. I will say that. The group uses its coordinated and companies to shut down coal and natural gas plants. That's not the same thing as using their control to as like getting together and saying our agenda is to not invest in oil and gas. So, and he's saying they push this at shareholder meetings and voting against directors and proposals that don't comport with their agenda. Now that's
Hmm.
different. A listener says BlackRock was buying oil and gas while pushing full ESG. Yeah, that's so. BlackRock pushes ESG investing, and they continue to invest in coal plants. Literally, I mean, I've like they're obvious. I don't think they're like colluding. Maybe this is an example of collusion, like because they're all like, but it's not the companies, right? Is it like what do you have to prove for something to be seen as collusion? I think you have to have like it has the consumer has to be harmed. So who's the consumer here? Is the consumer the American person consuming energy, or is the consumer the energy company that's not getting the loan or the funding because all of these financiers are part of this group that's saying don't do it?
Yeah, I see. I don't know the antitrust legislation
Yeah.
well enough to say. I do know that if you're talking about so if all the service companies came together and said we're going to charge this standardized day rate to all the oil and gas companies, that would be some kind of antitrust potential violation, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
because they're colluding to set the price that
Right.
they're offering the customer.
Yeah. What I don't think is what I'm not aware is
Or
happening is that the banks are
really,
not.
it's more like I would say it's really more like you also like set markets or something. So you don't just
Yeah.
set the
But
price. You also set like, okay, you can only provide to this. You can provide to these people, and you can provide to these
mhm,
people, and this is
mhm,
your market, and you can't like. Anyway,
right.
sorry.
Yeah, what I'm not
That's
what
all
I
good.
yeah, what I don't think is happening here is I don't think that Chase and all these banks are like on a conference call on Monday. They're like, "Hey, listen, we're not going to loan out anything to oil and gas companies or coal, plants or whatever." They're not actively talking about it, and so I mean they could be, but it would seem that you'd have to have them actively working together in a documented manner.
Yeah.
Not just they're all acting the same way, it seems, by and large, but I don't think they're coordinating that. So that's where it becomes tough.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think it's actually ESG. Like I think he's really conflating this idea of ESG because that's a different like thing, and a lot of oil companies qualify as ESG.
Right.
So lots of funds invest in oil companies and say that they are ESG.
Mhm. Mhm.
But
Okay.
this is more like the whole like activism, like getting on the boards and voting off shareholders, but that's not really setting the market.
Yeah.
So I just don't think it's gonna. He raises an interesting point, but I don't really think that it qualifies as collusion.
Well, but I mean, it there's nothing wrong with people colluding to boycott something.
Yeah.
I mean, you see that all the time. Like people
Right.
will band together and they'll collude to boycott, a pipeline or a grocery store or whatever. There's nothing illegal about that, to my
No,
knowledge.
and because the collusion has to do with you're colluding to harm the consumer.
Right. That's what I'm saying. So I don't. But
Yeah.
on the individual, I think on the individual level, it doesn't necessarily matter. And then, but I've seen companies who are part of those. I mean, look at there's companies right now that are colluding, if you will, to not buy from Russia.
Yeah.
That's outside the U.S. space. I don't know. Maybe that's different. Anyways, I don't know. Antitrust lawyers, come on, explain how this works to us
Yeah.
because I got a feeling it's one of those things that it's not entirely that clear. Okay, we only have I
Yeah.
think one more story on Brazil considers fuel subsidies. Now we kind of talked about some of this already a
Yeah.
little bit, but let's talk about Brazil.
Well, I was wondering if I was kind of seeing this as an example. I mean, at what point do governments feel the need to subsidize fuel costs for their people? That's not really something that we do in the United States, but lots of other countries do. And I thought it was interesting that Brazil is coming out as one of the first saying that they might do this, especially considering that they're not insignificant oil producers.
Mm.
But when is this going to come? Is Britain going to be subsidizing people's energy bills this winter because they're nuts? I mean, they're so outrageous.
Um,
What other countries might
India,
subsidize?
India is going to have
India,
to
yeah,
subsidize.
that's true. Yeah,
But what
India would do
about?
it.
I mean, I haven't seen a lot of news. I'm sure I haven't dug hard enough, but China's going to have to do something. They
Yeah,
can't sustain these high prices for months and months and months and months on end. They just
yeah.
can't. Their economy is not that strong to endure this. And so,
Can they
what are
afford
the?
to buy $90 Russian oil?
No, I don't think so. I think the number for them is like eighty
Yeah,
dollars, where it gets like untenable. And so,
yeah.
or maybe
Hmm.
it's 85. But you start looking at that
Yeah.
for long term
Aren't they
prices.
aren't they getting oil from Venezuela as like debt payments too?
Possibly. I'm not sure. I know
Yeah.
last time I looked at the Venezuela stuff, they were sending what oil to Iran via gold on a plane or something like that. So
Oh
they had
God.
some kind of weird
That's
deal.
why this whole thing of like the US going to Venezuela to try to be like to like discuss oil exports to replace Russia's like what oil exports?
Yeah.
like Venezuela, and then you had to read like way into the article until you find out that some guy who like represents like a trade group for all the Venezuelan oil companies said, "Oh yeah, in 8 months we could be increase production to by over 1 million barrels a day." Is the U.S. believing that? Like are the Biden people believing? Do they believe that? Because that's like it's like especially if Chevron keeps drills. Well, okay, and then somebody else said like it would require something like $5 billion of investment every year for 5 years to get the Venezuelan oil industry like going on the way that it was before all of this. So is the point of the Biden administration going to Venezuela because they want is it an excuse to hang out with Maduro? Do whatever it is that they want to do with him? Is it because they feel like Venezuelan oil is helping? They're trying to block off a trading partner for Russia. If so, they're gonna have a really hard time because doesn't like Rosneft own like half of Venezuela's debt right now or something like that? So that's gonna be really problematic. Okay.
And there's those legal battles that aren't cleared up, right? With like ConocoPhillips and remember they had all those legal battles. I don't know if those are all cleared up or not either.
Yeah, there are also legal battles. There are apparently like a bunch of like people who are being like held hostage who are Americans in Venezuela too. So, it's just or did they really think that like 400,000 barrels of oil from Venezuela is gonna? Are they just looking to compensate for what the U.S. was importing? In which case, like that's very selfish. Fine, but it's not gonna like help the global oil market. It's not gonna really do anything. So it just seems like
what we need is for the predictions during 2020 that we'd never hit 100 million barrels a day worth of oil to be true. That's what we need right now. Like, that would be.
we need peak demand.
Yes, we need peak demand. That would be the most efficient thing right
peak
now.
Demand.
Oh, gracious. Okay, I think that is it for this week, Dr. Wald. Next week we should have on Dean Foreman if
that's going to be interesting.
Oh, I know, right? So, where will you be this week?
This week I will be on investing.com and on Twitter following all the big moves.
Yeah. Well, hopefully no big moves. Hopefully no big moves.
Exactly.
Okay.
Oh, and I'm going to be on Bloomberg TV in the morning on Wednesday morning, like early, like 6:45 a.m. So.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah,
and I published. Go ahead. Sorry.
I said up and at 'em.
Yeah. Okay, so I finally got all my podcasts out for Inside the War Room. So we've had the backlog, got it cleared out. I think they're all out now. So we have one on President Harding, have one on Rossano with the Ukraine, Nigeria, all kinds of stuff. And then the Future of Tech podcast, I think we'll have an episode out this week. With that being said, we'll talk to everyone next week.